he didn't really make any predictions, but instead was looking at how electronic media was rising in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he was an English professor who really saw himself as a poet. So what he did was play with language, was try to really riff and brainstorm how he saw the media changing, and was creative enough that I think it still applies. That, his notion, for example, of a central nervous system quite accurately describes Twitter in terms of both its ability to connect us to breaking news around the world and the mundane things that people eat for breakfast, regardless of whether we want to know it or not. It's all there. And that actually ties into another one of his crazy ideas, which was narcissus as narcosis, that we're hypnotized by our devices, that our search for reflections of our own selves in the media causes us to be kind of obsessed with it at the same time. And you see this as many people when they leave the house, when they go outside, they have to be plugged in. They stare at a screen. They've got earbuds in their ears. For people who use media, for people who are connected, say, to social media, very much so. And it's two examples. One you cite, which is the connectivity, that we all really are in a kind of shared reality where if anything happens in the world, we tend to know about it. But the other is the negative side of the global village that really scared McLuhan, which was, the peer-to-peer surveillance, Facebook, the fact that we're now encouraged to spy on our friends, to spy on our coworkers so that we know everybody's business as if we lived in a small little village. That is true for many of us, but there still is a part of the population, a part of the Canadian population, maybe even in rural Nova Scotia, who aren't part of the global village, who are sort of on the outside looking in, who want to be part of it, but for reasons of access, for maybe even reasons of literacy, are not able to really make the most and be part of that society. So while it seems universal for us, I think it's a mistake to think that it is in the way McLuhan described it, that in reality it speaks to a kind of cultural apartheid where you have the information haves and the information have-nots who just don't have the same empowerment or access. Well, I think as a public intellectual, he'd feel quite vindicated. I mean, while he was popular in the 60s, he was actually quite unpopular in the 70s and sort of died somewhat miserable thinking no one would take him seriously. So I think he'd be quite enthused by the fact that his ideas are so mainstream. But he was always terrified of the world he described. I mean, he was a devout Catholic who went to Mass every day because he was worried essentially about the apocalypse, about a technology-induced, a machine-driven apocalypse. And I think he'd look at Facebook and he'd be like, I told you so. That's not the world I want to live in. And would continue to find solace in his books and sort of old media, as it were.